epic movies are an epic undertaking, and Avengers Endgame was among the most epic in its epicness. And now concept artist Ryan Meinerding has given us a look at a fight with Thanos we never saw. We learned last year that one of the most heartbreaking sequences in Endgame had the big footprint of Thanos all over it, when Thanos followed the powerless pair of Avengers to Vormir before it was changed to a battle between friends over who would make the big sacrifice. With the release of the concept art of the big scene, let's look back at what almost was. Ryan Meinerding might have one of the best jobs in the world. Outside of Marvel studio head Kevin Feige, no one probably has more of an influence over the look and feel of the MCU than Meinerding. Officially, his title is Head of Visual Development, but what that means in practice is that he's the first person to take the screenplays from written words and concepts into drawings that will guide how the movie ends up looking on screen. Every once in a while, Meinerding is good enough to share the art of past films with fans and to give us an idea of where the movie started and compare it to where it wound up. Recently, he did that with a panel showing Thanos showing up in a scene he wasn't in during the final cut of Avengers Endgame. We first learned of the altered scene in June of last year during Ace Comic-Con in Seattle. Asked about the big scene between Black Widow and Hawkeye, Jeremy Renner revealed that the original scene was much different. Instead of fighting each other to sacrifice themselves for the Soul Stone, they ended up under attack from Thanos himself, who had chased them down. The new scene, the one that ended up in the movie, turned out to be one of the last things shot, as they replaced the big attack with the more intimate battle between friends. Unlike most of the scenes cut from the final already daunting 3-hour runtime, the scene with Thanos' attack on Vormir had most of its effects already complete. Once they were in post-production, the Russo brothers started to realize that something wasn't measuring up in the scene. During an interview with Inverse, the brothers talked about the weight of that scene. Ultimately, it was decided that the emotional strength of the scene lie in these two longtime friends and dedicated fighters who knew that in order to get the stone, one of them had to go over. If the struggle remained between the two of them, it carried its emotional weight, but as soon as Thanos' horde shows up, they're fighting somebody that no one has any connection to. After Infinity War, there wasn't really any need to drive home exactly how menacing it is when Thanos comes to town. It's not the only change that happened between pre-production to the final product. Writers Christopher Marcus and Stephen McFeely had initially contemplated Hawkeye being the one to go over the cliff, but cite the women involved in the production who pleaded that the pair not take away that moment from the Black Widow. It ended up being the end of a bittersweet arc for a founding Avenger and one of Nick Fury's trusted agents when he was gathering the team. The concept art released by Meinerding shows Thanos looming in the background as the two powerless Avengers duck behind rocks, weapons ready. So what's different in this scene that we got and the scene we almost got? Everything stays more or less the same in the walk-up to Vormir. Red Skull gives the rules, the pair spend some time contemplating a way out of the situation before they come to the mutual decision that they are the one to go over the cliff. They get all the way up to the point where they realize the other one is the one who wants to take the dive. Then things change drastically. A bunch of Thanos ships show up, crashing the party. Almost immediately, Red Skull pops out of there. He don't get paid enough for this. Well, he actually doesn't even get paid at all. He's a trapped spirit paying the cost of his unquenchable urge for power. He can let these folks duke it out, and he'll come back to give the winner the bad news about what they won. Do you think he had a little spirit being break room with like a little space microwave and a TV playing interdimensional cable? How often do people come into Vormir? Since it was still there, whoever did probably balked at the price, or at the very least didn't know to bring the one they loved the most with them. Then you gotta go back and talk to the one you love the most and see if they'd be interested in being thrown off of a cliff so that you can get an Infinity Stone. Probably not a lot of takers. Given the cost, it was probably a big surprise that Cap showed up to return the stone. Almost as big a surprise as Cap finding that his old enemy Red Skull is guarding the stone. Where's that cutscene? Anyway, Hawkeye and Black Widow's tender moment is interrupted by ships firing upon them and Thanos' army shooting up the joint. The pair of super spies don't have the impressive array of powers that their teammates might have. No magic hammers, no mighty shields, no rage monster living inside them. But they are super spies. Sure, this was going to be a challenge, but whatever happened in Budapest was apparently a challenge as well, and they can't leave without that stone. So they come up with a pretty simple plan. On the count of 3, go. Pick targets, cover each other, work their way to the altar. Black Widow appears to agree, but at the count of 1, she Leroy Jenkins straight into the fight, leaving Hawkeye to provide cover fire for her. Here's where the scene gets pretty dramatic, as we start to see Natasha actually get wounded. Not knocked around by a super robot or trade blows with faceless aliens, but actual fatal-looking injuries. There's a pending finality to seeing that, when the heroes generally brush off massive attacks in movie after movie. Clint steps up to clear the road for Natasha, losing his sword but still taking down the nearest foe. Don't underestimate the super spies of the Avengers. But as a wounded Black Widow drags herself to the edge of the cliff, she looks back at her partner Clint and sees the looming figure of Thanos. While Hawkeye sat out Infinity War, instead taking the house arrest route, Natasha fought in Wakanda and had an uncomfortable front row seat to what happens when Thanos makes an entrance. So, to prevent Thanos from getting to Barton, she goes over the cliff herself, triggering the transition of Clint to the realm where the stone is kept. Maybe while they were working things out, the Red Skull explained exactly how it works. They obviously had a lot of questions in their time trying to figure out a workaround. Red Skull keeps saying the thing you love the most. Certainly, Clint tried to see if his trusty bow counted. I mean, you gotta ask, right? From there on out, everything is the same. Natasha goes over the cliff, the cloud gets its cool lightning effect, Barton wakes up in the shallowest and darkest infinity pool with the Soul Stone. How do you get out of Soul Stone space? Does it just drop you off wherever you want? He was able to bring back the Benatar because it was there at the end where Star-Lord and Thor had a discussion about who is captain. Mark a win for the park the ship far away from where you're going crowd. That means the Benatar was still there for Barton to shrink and take back to the future. I wanna go back into... Yeah, if this series happened in the 80s, Huey Lewis and the News totally would have done the soundtrack. Or Kenny Loggins. Either one means way more electric guitar. Given how late in the process the change was made, it would certainly seem like that one change would have that much effect. But there would be some implications. The biggest one is a variation on Hitchcock's concept of suspense. The short version is Hitchcock suggested that the surprise is a bomb going off suddenly. Suspense is the audience knowing the bomb is there and about to go off, and watching the people who don't know that. Either way, Endgame conformed to Hitchcock's sense of suspense. We know that the Nebula that returned to the Avengers present wasn't the Nebula that left. We knew that she was going to bring Thanos. We sat in suspense, knowing that Thanos was going to ruin everything. The difference here would be that one way or another, Hawkeye would know that Thanos is coming, that there's a ticking clock. Thanos finds out about the time heist at the latest possible moment. By this time, the 3 stones in New York had already been stolen 2 years prior. The Reality Stone a year ago. Thanos can't do anything at this point to prevent that heist. Hawkeye would return with the knowledge that Thanos knew what they were up to. In fact, given that Hawkeye was jumping forward 9 years, he probably had some concern that he would return to his time to find Earth already under the thumb of Thanos. This raises the question of what would Thanos' best plan be? Thanos became hip to the time heist at a good time. His army was already gathered up, and it didn't take much to collect them together for the big show. Now, to be sure, they also have as much time as they need to gather their forces. It doesn't matter when past Nebula triggers her time travel suit. She ends up in exactly the same time. But did Thanos make the wrong decision? He could have slow-boated to 2023, in fact, returning to Earth long before the Avengers returned. He would have faced a more unified Avengers, but he could have subjugated the Earth long before they returned. Though Thanos wasn't just traveling to 2023, he was traveling to a specific 2023, one in which he was successful and the remaining Avengers had assembled an Infinity Gauntlet of their own. In his world, the Soul Stone and Power Stone have been removed. He can't complete the gauntlet. And if he can't complete that gauntlet, he can't snap out half of existence. 2014 Thanos is in the wrong timeline at that point, so like we could guess, there really isn't that much change in the final showdown. As long as they left 2014 Thanos in the dust, he's not really a threat, unless they actually return and put the stones back, but that then creates its own time loops. So the only real change is in the dramatic weight of the moment. Would it have been cool to watch the super spy contingent of the Avengers take on Thanos, if only briefly? Well, we know the answer. Yeah, it's a cool scene. But it lacks the dramatic tension of the two members of the Avengers that have the closest relationship trying to sacrifice themselves for the other. It works as a conclusion to both the Black Widow story and for Hawkeye. After the cliff dance with Black Widow, it's easy to imagine Hawkeye figuring that's enough of that superhero life. but would open the door for him taking on a student like Kate Bishop to pass along the bow. So the last-minute change seems to have worked out for the best. And thanks to the magic of post-release extras, we get a glimpse of what could have been anyway. Well, that's the scene Ryan Meinerding's concept art that never made it into the movie. What do you prefer, the one-on-one or Thanos' attack on Vormir? Let us know in the comments, and while you're there, make sure and subscribe to CBR for the latest videos in your inbox. As always, thanks a lot for watching.